Well, welcome back to the XR Theater. Again, my name is Brennan Spiegel, the chairman of our virtual medicine program here at Cedars-Sinai. And on behalf of our entire VMed team, we're so happy that you're with us for this session in the XR Theater. Now, first up, it's my pleasure to introduce Mike Moret from Confidio Labs. Mike is a friend and a colleague and has been doing really interesting work using virtual reality and mixed reality and augmented reality for several years now, figuring out how to change the classroom of the future so that we go from, PowerPoint slides to three-dimensional immersive learning experiences. I personally have given a few talks inside of virtual reality using the technology from Confidio Labs, and it's just really great stuff. You can check out Confidio along with all of the other sponsors in our exhibit hall to learn more about what they do. In the meantime, Mike is going to be talking to us first up here on the topic of, appropriately, the classroom of the future, how immersive healthcare media is changing medical education and enriching provider engagement. So Mike, thanks so much for being with us today. The XR Theater floor is yours.
Okay, great. Good afternoon. Thank you for joining me in the XR Theater for today's session, which is entitled Immersive Healthcare Media, Enriching Stakeholder Engagement and Education. My name is Mike Moret. I am the founder and CEO of Confidio. As you can see from these videos here, although I might prefer to be together with you in some sort of a virtual setting, which would be apropos for this Congress, either in a VR or MR setup in some sort of shared collaborative session and experience, or even as a holographic representation of myself, as you can see there deployed on my desk in augmented reality. In lieu of not being able to do that, I suppose we'll make actual reality do just fine for today. Really glad to be together with you. Love this Congress and conference and glad to be back here in 2022. For today, I plan to provide my perspective on immersive healthcare media and the many ways that we as an organization and what I've experienced over years have been able to successfully utilize three-dimensional educational and engagement programs to really improve and enhance the delivery of critical, oftentimes clinical content, and the ways that we've done it across channels as well as across audiences. So just a bit about the company. Confidio is a digital media firm, and we do specialize, of course, in the design, development, and deployment of immersive multimedia tactics and strategies, and we do so for the healthcare industry. We've been doing this for over 8 years, and during this time, we're really proud to have pioneered a wide range of initiatives with our clients and have delivered over 300 projects now for pharma brands, agencies, and even health systems. And these programs have existed across channels. They've been used across audiences, and they've even traveled across the world as well. Just some context. We're very proud to share that over the past 2 years in our space, programs we've created have been recognized as the best HCP or healthcare professional educational initiative, as well as the best use of immersive technology. So moving on, just categorically, immersive multimedia as we see it through our lens from a promotional and educational perspective. Again, we're talking about multiple audiences, both healthcare professionals, patients, caregivers, other stakeholders in the space, et cetera. We endeavor always, while we're considering the audience, to work with our customers to help them tell their stories in ways that are in effect reimagined, but always by leveraging sort of burgeoning or emerging technologies and pairing the tech with consideration for the channel with some type of immersive or multidimensional, call it progressive media. The intention is to, in combination, sort of unlock really the power and the potency of the new media paired with the progressive tech to oftentimes evoke empathy as a mechanism to enhance storytelling, but ultimately really just to deepen education. We always endeavor to create experiences that improve retention, specifically on the clinical side, and always look to do so in a way where we can take complex content that we build and amortize it for use across channels and across screens. Ultimately, and as salient as possible, this is what we endeavor to do when we're thinking about immersive healthcare media. Take important stories and determine how we can optimize them or reimagine them to deepen education and, of course, elevate engagement. Okay, so for today, I'm going to break down really 3 subcategories of extended reality, or as I will call it, immersive healthcare media. So we'll start with virtual reality, which simply defined, of course, replaces reality. Then we'll move through to mixed reality, which is a blending in our view, and then land the plane with augmented reality, which of course pairs with the real world for the purpose of enhancing it and bringing still very multi-dimensional immersive experiences to customers. So we'll start with VR, and I'm sure everyone here in attendance as well as at the conference are quite familiar by now. We've been working in the VR space since 2013. You're seeing the way technically the category is defined, but what I'll tell you is what I love about it for educating and inspiring medical professionals in particular. Understanding this is an audience that is very difficult, we'll say, to connect with more traditional mediums and media. The headset, which is the primary delivery vehicle for virtual reality, brings quite a luxury, however, in that it can in effect function as a sensory deprivation tank, fundamentally depriving the end user, in our case primarily that's a clinician, of all distractions, and really guaranteeing ultimately for the first time ever in an express way that the content on the device or the content in the screen within the device is going to be delivered without any interruption. Some may say this is in effect sort of the holy grail of clinical storytelling, and I would agree. The data point you're seeing here in pink, which is suggesting retention rates of as high as 90%, come from a variety of third-party studies that we've supported, whereby in effect we're enabling clinicians to review content flat on a screen with borders. And then another set of doctors, the same program, but on a headset, again, leveraging the fact that it's a sensory deprivation tank. What you're seeing here is recall and retention studies that were completed following this exercise corroborated that it did reach as high as 90% when deployed on an immersive headset, whereas the same experience or the same content on a flat screen with borders, that retention rate was in the neighborhood of about 20%, which is otherwise an industry standard and acceptable. But when you compare that to the return on investment or the dramatically bolstered retention of information, another ROI, it's obviously quite dramatic. So as patients, I really certainly appreciate how this is a tool can really better enhance education and engagement for clinicians in ways that are meaningful. Moving forward, and you're seeing this backdrop here, this of course is an example of a digitally produced program that happened to have been disseminated on headsets. Another thing we love about VR is that unique ability to give visual learners, which we know clinicians are, that anatomical or cellular perspective, really first person, enabling them to peer around organic structures or anatomical models. In this case, this is the alveoli within the lung. The result in combination is not just improved retention of key data and clinical content, but also a prolonged experience, which is very, very valuable in our industry as well. You're seeing here this particular program, which is serving as the backdrop when deployed by field representatives, enjoyed an engagement of over 3.5 minutes when clinicians wore the headset. So moving on, this backdrop here you're seeing is, of course, video versus a fully digitally rendered program, because on the other side of the spectrum, virtual reality is incredibly effective at being used to evoke empathy. Some will call it the ultimate empathy engine or the empathy machine. Because once inside that simulation, as you see, the user becomes totally immersed. And in effect, you forget about the fact that you maybe are otherwise sitting at a desk or sitting at a chair at a conference. You become so engrossed in a very visceral way in that experience in front of you that it becomes very powerful and potent for emotional storytelling, which is also pretty prominent across the pharmaceutical and life sciences industry. So as you'll see here, this particular program is enabling dermatologists to not just see, but to feel through VR what it's like to live and go through a variety of moments in various patients' lives. This happens to be still image, of course, from various vignettes that were produced to demonstrate what it's like to live with plaque psoriasis. And in this case, it's at the baseline. So things like the judgmental looks and or some of the everyday challenges, which in this case reminded dermatologists of the importance of not just getting to a baseline clearance, but going as far as they possibly can to mitigate some of the things that they experienced and felt themselves in virtual reality. As you see here, again, mechanisms to corroborate the category from a VR perspective. The brain accepts the virtual world quite quickly. We utilize that, appreciate that when we create programs. And as I mentioned, users or customers stay in for prolonged periods, which is quite valuable. All that leads to what you see from Dr. Lowe towards the bottom, just reinforcing the value of VR as a teaching, learning, and engagement tool, again, for visual learners, primarily clinicians in our experience. Moving now into mixed reality. There'll be a couple of clips here with audio that I'll run for you, but MR distinguishes itself in that this is the mixing or the merging of real and virtual world, ultimately to create new environments. All of the examples you see behind here and the upcoming video are all examples of how we helped customers and even clinicians reimagine the way that they give live stage presentations, particularly from a teaching and medical education perspective, going beyond the traditional didactic PowerPoint presentation given from stage and actually empowering clinicians to present from within slides, explore models and anatomy, and do it in a shared experience with the room who feel as if they're going along for the ride. So I'm choosing to focus here on medical education as it relates to MR because I know that Dr. Spiegel really enjoys this. The next clip will be him actually in a MR presentation live on stage at ACG.
There's actually C. difficile, I believe. Gotta move that guy over. This thing maybe kind of.
This is a composite view of Dr. Spiegel layered on top of course, what he's experiencing from a first-person point of view in virtual reality.
Find out what we're looking at here. All right, so this is lactobacillus, and it's a little bit of information on.
Remarkable to me was seeing.
And here you'll hear from doctors their view on experiencing this from the room.
Imaging on top of anatomy to better understand the spatial relationships, and then move the echo aside and actually see anatomically what you're looking at when you're actually looking at it in 2 dimensions. To me, that's the kind of learning that isn't possible without this technology.
Our audience of healthcare providers, whether it's nurses, physicians, pharmacists, whatever, immersing them in an experience where it's more than just a talking head showing slides, but actually being able to get in and see what that means from different views from their eyes would really be memorable. And isn't that really what you want at the end of an educational program, as they walk away remembering what they've learned or heard there?
So again, just giving you some perspective, VR versus MR. These particular examples on the MR side happen to focus on medical education, again, featuring Dr. Spiegel, but we've worked with a myriad of clinicians all around the world to, again, bring audiences into a more immersive and engrossing experience for the purpose of genuinely bolstering their retention with the content that's being delivered. So bringing the clinician within the slide, an ability to layer on things like scans over anatomical models, and then actually experience and explore that by gesturing through with a headset is quite potent and powerful. Now we'll move into augmented reality. Augmented reality has become incredibly relevant, of late for a variety of reasons. I mean, I would say first and foremost, any and everyone likely tuning in today has in their pocket a device that has the ability to deploy augmented reality. So it is quite pervasive and less device dependent. This enables us to go broader with these types of programs. As I mentioned earlier, AR simply defined is an enhancement of reality, and we achieve that by overlaying live action video capture and or digitally created animations, holograms, etc., into a user's real world to aid teaching. So from a pharmaceutical and or medical education perspective, we collaborate with our clients in this capacity to create programs that enable engagement opportunities that really extend to the stakeholders' second screen. So how do you go beyond flat material, be it print or even on a screen with borders, and bring it to life in a dramatic and almost magical fashion to really drive education, but also distinguish and differentiate the presenter and also their product. So I'll go through a variety of examples here. I chose to include several just to give you perspective on the breadth of applications and opportunities from an AR perspective. Here you're seeing a screen recording, and each of these video examples, mind you, will be screen recordings from actual devices. So this is an AR experience in the real world being recorded. This, of course, is an animated, immersive, and interactive heart. This particular program was crafted for a client. It was purpose-built for field rep dissemination to enable that over-the-shoulder and kind of joint collaborative, exploratory, and educational experience between representative, and their HCP customer. This happened to be, at the time, the industry's first depiction, in this case, of an animated interactive heart that HCP customers could fully explore and enjoy in 3D, deployed to the field through also a collaboration with Viva, which is a prominent CRM tool that pharmaceutical marketers and brands utilize. Again, totally interactive. You've got the innate interactivity of being able to gesture the device and explore. And in effect, this is a way of bringing to life what cardiologists otherwise have on their desk, which is that 3D model. Now you're dramatizing it, making it interactive, showing it healthy, unhealthy, et cetera, et cetera. I'll move on. Another example of ways that you can really strategically utilize augmented reality to aid education. In this case, this is taking presentations that had otherwise been built and delivered didactically as PowerPoint and bringing them from the surface or off the screen. So the bottom example is actually a poster presentation. So with a device, you could go up to the poster, a trigger is embedded, will activate augmented reality, as you see, to sit in front of that poster and enable a much more upfront, immersive, and interactive experience with the content. And the image above, the recording above, is showing you really the cool things that can be done with data and the many ways that we can pivot accesses and have data come to life, which you otherwise kind of really can't do with flat mediums. These particular programs can be deployed as augmented reality apps, as you see. They can be deployed as derivative video versions of themselves. And we also build them using WebGL, which in effect is embeddable web code that enables programs like this or any of these AR examples to also exist as immersive and interactive web experiences. Moving forward, these are pretty fun. These are examples of creating digitally rendered avatars, patients. So if a storyline warrants anchoring itself to the introduction of a patient, and or if you want to use a potential patient to represent to a clinician three-dimensional scans layered to a degree, as you see across the bottom, on top of that patient avatar. These are wonderful opportunities to do so because it's very dramatic, and in effect, you're achieving the sense of having a life-sized patient there with you in the room. And to give you perspective, you could see on the bottom of the screen a colleague of mine standing behind a life-sized avatar that we brought to life magically in a conference setting. The settings and the channels are pretty limitless for programs like this, and the appetite is pretty significant because of, again, the visual and visceral nature, particularly when we can ingest clinical scans, reproduce them as 3D, and demonstrate how they apply to a potential patient.
Hello, my name is Luis. I'm scheduled.
I'm going to pause here. Moving on, an evolution of portraying patients is using AR a little bit different. Where the previous slide, these were characters created and rendered digitally and had no speaking role. This is an opportunity to, in effect, transform print to digital to enable an otherwise printed version of a patient to come to life and tell snippets of their story. So I'll run it again from the beginning here. And this is AR using video capture to bring, in this case, Luis to life.
Hello, my name is Luis. I'm scheduled to have PCI with stenting to address my coronary artery stenosis. Is it safe to keep taking my medication after my procedure?
This particular program had a variety of triggers such as that one. There's this very seamless transition again from print to video and then back. Throughout these multi-page brochures, there again were a variety of triggers using the device you hover over that would activate the AR to magically come to life. And it was meant to complement the dialogue, in this case being given by representatives as they're engaging with their HCP customer. I'll move on and show you another evolution. I'll let it run first.
Hello, my name is Laura. I was recently diagnosed with MVAF. I asked my doctor about treatment options because I have many more of my grandchildren's birthday parties to attend.
Thank you, Laura. So this is actually an evolution of the previous campaign, going beyond embedding video in print and achieving that transformative nature as you saw previously. But now what we're doing, and again, this was a global industry first, was utilizing volumetric video to actually capture performances in fully 3D to then portray, in this case, patients telling a bit about their story as they stand on top of a card, which tells a bit more about their particular situation, and it brings them to life in full 3D as actual holograms. How do we do that? So if you're unfamiliar, thought I'd just pause and talk to you a bit about volumetric video. So volumetric video is a very specialized capture process, requires 108 cameras capturing content from all angles. You see across the bottom examples of the studio in which we complete these programs. We pair the video capture with the dozens of microphones that capture the audio from every angle, ingest all that data, convert it into augmented reality, pair it with animated digital assets as well to bring to life examples like you saw previously. On the next slide, I'll show you pretty much same production process, but done to bring to life a clinician to give kind of a key opinion leader overview, which is also interactive and engaging equally as a hologram and also deployed through augmented reality. Oh, here's a couple of examples first. Forgive me. On the next slide, here comes the video.
Hi, my name is Dr. Richard Wright. Today, we will discuss a study based on real-world data. But first, we should point out that randomized clinical trials remain the gold standard for data-based medicine. Nonetheless, real-world studies can be a complementary tool for assessing and reinforcing the safety and efficacy generated by randomized controlled trials. The question we want to answer is, how does dabigatran really stack up in this study? Touch the treatment that was associated with the lowest incidence of the endpoint listed beside me. We'll begin with thromboembolic stroke and end with all-cause mortality. When you're finished, we'll discuss the results. In this study, which treatment was associated with the lowest incidence of thromboembolic stroke?
So it's a very interesting, again, evolution. And the intention here with the AR side of today's conversation was to show you the variety of ways that you can utilize AR across channels, across audiences, and also the various content styles, from digitally rendered, fully interactive programs, such as Gross Anatomy, perhaps, all the way through to what we're now doing, utilizing volumetric video to, in the most magical way, genuinely bring perhaps a familiar key opinion leader here, as you're seeing, into the room. Could be countertop size, could be life size, all really depends upon the channel and the strategy with our client. All of these programs also comprise a variety of interactivity. What you saw there was the magic as it appeared that these buttons floated out of his hand. Then the end user holding the device was engaged and asked to select one. Upon selecting, that's how the charts then animated. This particular program, he goes through a series of these cases, challenges, and questions. All the data is logged, reported. But the boon here is that the end user, the customer, stays very engaged, very focused on the program for the duration with no interruption, no distraction. So with that, I believe it concludes my time. Again, very grateful always to support this very important conference and give our perspective through the lens of pharmaceutical marketing, promotions, medical education, really for pharma, healthcare, and the broader life sciences. And I hope that some of these examples that I've shared with you today inspire you and or give you perspective on some of the good work that's been done, but also the potential ahead of us as we continue to evolve the immersive multimedia category so that we can better educate and better inspire all stakeholders in our space. Very grateful. Thank you for your time. Have a wonderful day. I look forward to seeing you soon.
Well, thank you, Mike, so much for sharing with us that vision into the future and now increasingly into the present of medical education enabled by XR. We appreciate your presentation today. Next up in the XR Theater, it's my privilege and honor to introduce Nenea Reeves from Trip, CEO of Trip. Many of you may have heard of Trip. I've certainly enjoyed tripping myself, and you can learn more about Trip VR in the virtual exhibit hall, so check that out when you have a chance. Those of you that have used Trip know it to be a very relaxing, meditative experience, sort of a cyberdelic trip of sorts. And it's available to consumers on a variety of app stores, including Oculus. And so today we're going to be hearing from Nenea, who will be talking about the cyberdelic trip, how VR promotes cognitive flow. So Nenea, thanks so much for being with us here at Virtual Medicine 22. Look forward to hearing your comments.
Hi, my name is Nenea Reeves, and I'm CEO of Trip. And I'm excited to share what we're doing. I started my career in the video game industry, and so how I got here running a wellness company has been an amazing journey. And I think, really what had the biggest impact on me was the fact that I love playing video games, and it's video games industry gave me a great career. And the compassion of a very kind therapist who I met when I was a teenager in the throes of a mental health crisis. She taught me how to meditate. And this was way before the McMindfulness apps of today, which have done such a wonderful job of lowering the barrier into meditation and definitely have reduced the stigma around it. But when I started, I was embarrassed to tell my friends, but it really, I believe, is the reason why I am very successful in my life today, in spite of a lot of odds working against me. This is a picture of my friend Brendan, who is the founding CEO of Oculus. I had the good fortune of being an early angel investor in Oculus, and he's sharing a very early demo version of the device with my husband, Vic. And it was just shortly after this picture was taken that Vic was diagnosed with cancer, and we were told we had 8 months left together, and he was gone within 8 weeks from that diagnosis. But that day was really what inspired me to want to work in VR. I was blown away by the experience, and I was really intrigued by how I felt coming in and out of virtual reality. And that brought me to thinking about how we could bring video game technologies and mindfulness structures together into the company that is now Trip. We started Trip in September of 2017. It was just an idea in my head as I thought about how do I go forward rebuilding my life. And it's been an amazing experience to actually run the company and build a really wonderful working environment that has already started to have a lot of impact on people's lives. We have a great team, and our team comes from the entertainment industry, working with Niantic, also with Disney and Applied VR. And we've just brought in a director of clinical operations who is a specialist in EMDR and psychedelic therapy, especially ketamine currently. But really what we're excited about is this massive evolution of computing moving from the hand to the head and how it will drive a tremendous amount of innovation, especially when you think of the confluence of head-mounted displays, 5G edge computing, and also distributed online worlds and decentralized technologies like Web3. It's really the time right now for a wellness solution that is considered next gen for these head-mounted displays. And, you know, unfortunately, all of us have been struggling with our emotional well-being during the last 24 months, whether we have a mental health diagnosis or not. And Trip really found its true product market fit in the last 24 months. We have garnered millions of sessions. We've seen 3 times growth year over year, with 50% of our accounts being on recurring revenue. We've been acknowledged as a pioneer and a leader in the space, and especially on how we're using our product to support the psychedelic industry, which is something I'll talk about in a little bit. We bring together mindfulness structures, gameplay mechanics, sound frequencies, targeted visuals, all in the immersion of VR in a way that's really uniquely wonderful and, I believe, awe-inspiring. We are live on all the top VR platforms as a consumer offering, and we just started to expand into AR with our first smart glass catalog release on the Nreal glasses. And I'll talk about a little bit about how we're going to scale out more. But we see this opportunity of really building what we call the mindful metaverse on the consumer side as our biggest opportunity over the next 2 to 3 years. And we think of ourselves more than just mindfulness in XR. We really do see ourselves as a platform. We have a very powerful technology stack that generates our experiences procedurally. Our entire team are hands-on code. And but what we found is not only do we make our own experiences, we've become a meaningful distribution channel for other creators who have built wonderful transformative experiences. And now as we expand our mobile footprint, we're finding that it has opened up even more broadly to sound creators and even NFT artists who are featured in our new mobile app that just launched on the iOS App Store. We do have clinical trials up and running. We have been very open with our application, and there are many research initiatives being run by third parties. We do also work with those research initiatives to give them access to de-identified session data, and will help them navigate the device deployments in their channels. And it's been a joy to work with academia in the mental health categories, specifically meaningful to me in addiction recovery because of the struggles that I've seen several of my family members, including a sister who I lost to addiction. And when we think of what it means to build the mindful metaverse, it's really about how our apps are distributed across all the XR platforms, VR, AR, and mixed reality, where we're starting to see devices go to market with full color pass through. We also really do believe in live programming, and our offering has expanded with the acquisition of a live meditation community. It does 30 live group sessions per week. They do 3 to 4 sometimes a day. Very active audience. And we saw a lot of crossover between our customers and their audience, and made sense to join forces. The next expansion of our product is into location-based AR, where we're building on top of the Niantic Lightship platform, and how to augment the way that you see the world around you. And you'll see us also move into creating more of our own social spaces, and then ultimately scaling out into world creation. Really, we don't think of it as VR, AR, mobile. We think of it more like reality layering. And this kind of gets us into that concept of what is a cyberdelic. And so with VR, we can create these very immersive and powerful experiences that drive a deeper connection to self. And that can also be expanded to allow you to connect to others, where you can give and receive support in ways that are very otherworldly, but very meaningful connections. And now, as we look at how to augment reality, we're looking at it as a way to incorporate a reward feedback loop that when you transform yourself, will transform the way that the world looks around you. And it is a very exciting evolution of how we will enable features that where you can personalize your private spaces with beautiful digital objects, and then also work with a global community to enhance the world in public spaces as representations of your own self-care. So no matter what you think the metaverse is, and I know there's a lot of topic about even the medical metaverse, the metaverse is going to be distributed in many ways. It already is. There's apps on devices, there's building your apps on different types of infrastructure like we're doing with Niantic now. We're built on the Unity platform. We're starting to do experimentation with edge computing and how that will deliver streamed versions of our product. And then also expanding the Evolver community into other worlds so that we can have more touch points with people who want to come together in mindful engagements. There's a huge platform that we have powering our solutions. We have a procedural engine that allows us to adapt experiences in real time. People can personalize their experience and really, have agency over their journey that they want to have in our app. There's identity management that allows us to deliver content to a single customer across multiple platforms. And then we have an entitlement system that can work with our own billing interface, as well as with all of the app stores that we are currently live on. You will see us deploy out into Web3 interfaces with our first NFT drop that is a heart rate driven meditation mandala that can be accessed in a web browser. So one of the things that I am excited though about is how to create altered states in the use of immersive environments. And I'd like to share with you a video of an experience that we're very proud of. It's not available publicly, and it's called Journey.
working minds. I'll tell you how I do it. Using a mantra.
When Ram Dass's organization reached out to us with this opportunity to create an experience that would be an homage to his psilocybin trip, it was just one of those moments where we realized this is why we started this company, to be able to tell those kind of stories in ways that were interactive and immersive, and using technology in ways that, are thinking outside the box. And it was just such an honor. Like I said, we couldn't say no to it.
Trip is a platform to help people deepen their connection to themselves and to the world around them using immersive technology. Journey, it is about different ways to connect to reality. And I was fortunate enough to be called to be the lead creative. And one of the ideas was to put it on a library, which is a representation of this rational knowledge all around you. And he realizes that all these achievements are more of a trap, they're not enough. And all these representations of what he thought he was were not really himself, and they start dissolving. He starts talking about his psilocybin experience, and then the whole environment starts vibrating, and you are sitting and suddenly you rise from your seat and start like seeing things very differently. What seemed to be solid is not solid, and ends up dissolving in this kind of magical, crazy, beautiful environment.
We wanted something very special for the 50th anniversary of the publication of Be Here Now, and also, of course, Ram Dass passing almost 2 years ago. And this film allows you to let go a little bit and give you a taste of going beyond the story you tell yourself, the thoughts you believe in, the habitual patterns that have held you at bay for most of your life. And I mean you, I mean us. And I think that it's like getting a little bit of a push from behind. It's okay while your hand's being held.
It's what happened after you leave your ego. You leave everything behind, everything that you knew to be yourself. And now what happens? You don't know. That's kind of like, once you are able to surrender, face your fear, but accept it, then there's like this rebirth where life is just beautiful and vibrant, and it was also amazing to find ways to represent.
I hope that when people experience Journey, that they will have a sense of Ram Dass's energy still being present in this reality. Journey will be part of our new clinical offering called PsyAssist. It will be an educational component to the catalog that we've created to support mental health clinics, especially those that are treating patients with ketamine therapy. The use case initially will be pre-session and post-session anxiety reduction. And then we have some support tools that can help the patient in between sessions. The offering will have a VR application that will be used in the clinic itself. The patient can recline or sit upright, and the experience can be controlled by the clinician through an interface on the tablet. And as mentioned, there is a PsyAssist mobile app that the patient can take with them and use audio and video content that is targeted to support them specifically in between 1 to 3 sessions. And our mission really at Trip is to build technologies that help give people agency over how they feel. And really, we believe that mental health should simply be health. there really isn't a difference between taking care of our emotional and mental well-being as there is our physical well-being. And that's really it in a nutshell. So I hope that you found this interesting. And I'm so grateful to Brennan and his team for all they do in the community. And I'm glad I could be a small part of it. If you'd like to reach out to us, you can connect with our team at trip.com through our website, or you can hit me up directly on Twitter, where my handle is @Nanea, Nanea. So thank you very much, and bye-bye.
Well, thank you as always, Nanea, for sharing your perspectives, experience, and wisdom about XR and its benefits for mind and body here at VMed 22. So next up in the XR Theater, I am pleased to introduce Simon Robertson from Kind VR. Simon has a background in game design and digital interactivity, and has been focused on understanding and applying XR with kids. And so today he's going to be giving a talk titled Designing VR Apps for Pediatric Procedures, Research and Outcomes. If you want to learn more beyond the talk he's about to give, you can also visit the Kind VR booth in the exhibit hall. And then also tomorrow, we're going to have a whole deep dive on pediatric applications of XR. In the meantime, I look forward to hearing this talk about the use of VR in pediatric care. Thanks so much, Simon, for being with us today, and the floor is yours.
Hey everyone, I'm Simon Robertson. I'm the founder of Kind VR. And today I'm going to be talking about the medical procedures that we support using custom VR applications, some of our clinical trials and some of that research. And then I'll be sharing our design philosophy and lessons learned when it comes to creating custom applications for difficult medical procedures for patients. So I started Kind VR over 7 years ago at UCSF Benioff Oakland Children's Hospital, working alongside child life specialists and working with sickle cell patients. And that's where we created our first clinical trial. And since then, I'm proud to say that we're now being used actively in over 65 hospitals in the US and Canada. We have 15 clinical trials partnered with a variety of pediatric hospitals. And I want to mention that we're really customized and focused on procedures. So we've always been targeting and trying to understand what are the most difficult procedures that patients have to go through, and how can we create safe, effective applications that can help patients mitigate pain and stress. So we provide a clinically validated tool for child life specialists, nursing teams, and emergency room technologists to use. And we have a real focus on safety first when it comes to analyzing the procedure. And we also have an emphasis on ease of integration. We want to make sure that what we're providing is a simple tool that can be kind of added to the workflow and can benefit patients and be useful for providers. So that's what we do. We make custom VR therapies to help patients lower their pain and stress during procedures. And we do that by trying to understand the patient or the procedure. And then we develop a custom VR solution with our team of developers. And then we partner to run clinical trials for specific outcomes. And then we refine our applications during that study or during those trials. And then finally, once the studies are complete, we expand our VR therapy offering and provide it to all of our hospitals and centers for routine use. So let's dive into our procedures and our common use cases for VR interventions. So port access is one of our most common use cases. And so that's a Metaport access procedure primarily for oncology patients who are undergoing chemotherapy and that sort of treatment. So our first study was at Sick Kids in Toronto. And then we have studies at Comer Children's and Children's Wisconsin. For sickle cell, we have a real focus on pain management while sickle cell patients are undergoing a vaso-occlusive pain crises. So we've completed studies at Oakland Children's, and then we have active trials at St. Jude Children's and more recently, Children's Michigan. In the emergency room at Sick Kids in Toronto as well, we've completed a study looking at IV insertion procedures. And similarly, in the Bronx at Children's Hospital Montefiore, we've completed a study looking at laceration repair, also known as stitches. And then at that same hospital, we have another study looking at venipuncture, so blood draws for patients. And then at Cook Children's in Texas, we have a study starting up pretty soon looking at VCUG procedures, which is a diagnostic imaging procedure for catheter placements. And for that one, we've designed a custom application for the supine body position where you're laying perfectly flat. And we're really hoping to learn quite a lot through that trial. At Dell Children's, we have a study looking at dermatology procedures. So that's skin biopsies and other painful procedures, unfortunately. At Nationwide Children's, we have a study looking at orthopedics. So that's leg brace adjustments. And then Phoenix Children's, we have a pre-op anxiety study that's been completed where patients actually wear the headset as they go through from the pre-op waiting room into the operating room for tonsillectomy procedures. And then at Oakland Children's, we've completed a trial and we have another one ongoing at Children's Colorado looking at MRI practice. So that VR application is a tool to help educate and desensitize patients before they do their MRI scan. So now on to some of our research. One of our first studies was done at UCSF Benioff Children's Hospital, Oakland, and that looked at sickle cell patients on the second day of their vaso-occlusive pain crises. So they're coming to the hospital with 10 out of 10 pain usually, and staying at the hospital for about 5 days. So on the second day, we had patients fill out the adolescent pediatric pain tool. So they colored in their body areas affected by pain. They rated their pain score on a scale of 0 to 10. And then they completed these descriptor words that correlate to different elements of pain. Some are emotional, some are temporal. It's kind of another insight into pain. So for body areas affected, pre our VR intervention, on average, patients gave us 3 out of 10, or sorry, just 3 body areas affected by pain. And then afterwards, that number dropped to 2. And then for those descriptor words, patients filled out on average about 20% available, and that number dropped to 12 after virtual reality. And then most importantly, for that pain intensity, on average, patients gave us 7.3 out of 10 on that pain score. And asking their pain score immediately after VR, that number dropped to 5.8. So we saw a 21% reduction in pain. And working with our team there, we asked them what they thought of this, and they reminded us that these are patients who are already on some of the world's strongest pain medications, fentanyl and what have you. And they were really encouraged to see that VR was able to cause this reduction, because they were suggesting that, hey, when we increase the dosage, we don't really see this 7.3 number move. So we're really encouraged that virtual reality can help patients in the inpatient setting, and hoping to learn more with our follow-on study at St. Jude. And then we have another study looking at port access procedures at Sick Kids in Toronto. And this study is especially important to me because of our collaboration. So for this one, and just to let you know, for those who don't know, port access is a needle procedure usually located on the chest. It's used for chemotherapy. And what we were able to do is have oncology patients wear the headset and give us feedback on our application. At that time, it was KindVR Aqua, our underwater experience. And we collected feedback from them before even doing the procedure. So, do you want to wear the headset during it? Do you think you'll feel comfortable? And trying to get a sense of patient body position. And then we refined the application and had patients then start to wear the headset during the actual procedure and collected feedback, and then made some modifications, and then did another cycle of the trial with patients during the actual procedure. So this is a great way to kind of start with an idea, collect feedback from patients, refine it, and then refine it again before releasing it. And what we're delighted to say is we made a variety of changes to the application and created what we now call KindVR Lookup, which is a version of Aqua that's really designed for patients in their hospital bed at about 45 degrees. And what's great about that is everything that they interact with is above eye level. So in terms of patient body position, patients are leaning back and keeping their head up. They're focused at interacting with fish and dolphins at the surface of the ocean. There's no coral or anything below them. And that way they're keeping their head up. They're not breathing on the sterile field. They don't feel like they need to lean forward to look down. And that is sort of the core example of what we do. And then during that study, we were able to emphasize patient and staff communication. We found that the communication plan that a patient and a provider has, or a child life specialist and a patient has, as much as VR can help pull you out of that hospital room and drive your attention into that virtual world, it's still important to maintain that communication and allow patients to dictate if they want to take a moment to take off the headset or take a look around or want updates on how the procedure is going. We learned it's really worth maintaining that. The power of VR is great, but the power of patient choice is just as important. And as I mentioned before, it's really where we figured out the patient body position, their sense of security. It allowed us to double down on our emphasis on infection control, especially on a procedure of that kind. So now let's talk a little bit about designing for medical procedures. And I'm going to share some of our thinking as we approach each of our applications. So first is designing for safety. As motivating it is to make a highly interactive, immersive game using all the tips and tricks and tools that VR provides to us, it's really important to emphasize safety first and prioritize the procedure. So let every design decision that you're making come from what is the procedure, what direction is the patient facing, how long is it, what kind of interaction do you want them to have, and let that kind of set the stage first. And so, of course, we're trying to minimize patient body movement, which is a little bit antithetical to VR. In VR, you want to be moving your hands or spinning around. And for us, we're designing for a hospital bed or a chair or a supine body position or a reclined body position. So it's really important to provide easy interaction and interactions that allow a lot of customization depending on what hand is free, where the needle or the procedure might be happening. So it's important to focus patients' attention forward. So for example, in all of our applications, you're allowed to look around. So in Aqua, it's fine if patients do want to, especially at the start, look behind them. And in that one, they're actually in a little submersible, little undersea submarine. And so they can look behind them, but patients quickly learn what I see behind me is just bright white, and they have kind of a window to the world. And so they quickly know, oh, if something goes overhead and passes by me, I can follow it with my eyes, but pretty soon it's going to be out of bounds. And there's no reason to try and turn around and track it. So it's important to occlude patients' vision so that their center of attention is in front of them. And in terms of the experience and kind of some of the interaction, we really recommend that you start slow. So don't dial up music or anything like that. Let the experience ramp up over time. So introduce things slowly, let patients get familiar with the environment, the game actions, make sure that they can hear the patient or the provider so that a child life specialist or a nurse can communicate with the patient. And let that moment sort of sink in before you kind of go from 0 to 60. And then one thing to consider is not just the procedure, but also the patient's condition, what medication they're on, how much stimulus really do they want to accept at the start, and make sure that you're emphasizing something simple and digestible to set the stage. And as I mentioned before, the communication plan between child life specialists or nursing teams and patients, make sure that that's still there. So You don't want to kind of take over. Again, this is really a tool for child life specialists to use and not something that is going to replace them. So it's up to child life specialists to decide when to interact and bring this into the patient's room and to make sure that they're sort of leading the moment and communicating with the patient. And then finally, it's really important to iterate based on research. So leading a design team, we have a sense of what the procedure is and what a patient's going through, and try and bring as much empathy and understanding as we can to this difficult moment. But it's really important to make sure that you're doing clinical trials so that what you've created is clinically validated, and both for outcomes around pain scores and comfort, but also around just safety and usability. And we think that's a very important step to what we've been able to provide. So then in terms of accessibility, it's really important to think about your patients in terms of the widest range that you can have an impact on. So often you're working with restricted mobility patients, patients who may not have use of their hands, may not have use of even moving their head, and you want to make sure that they have some connection to the experience and can benefit from that. So it's important to think about having simple interactions that are easy for them to do. So not reaching out and moving levers or pressing a series of buttons, but hopefully, say in this example with the elephant I just showed you, being able to just move your head gently and still be able to do the main action, which is giving these creatures a drink of water and washing them off. So you want that first interaction to feel like a success for them. So they're not, fighting uphill to participate and interact with the application that you've created. And then in terms of controllers, it's really important to use one button or sometimes even no button interaction. And so by one button, I mean one button to start the application, one button to pick their application if they're doing that, and one button to do the main game action, and one button to resume. So creating complicated menus where you're picking left and right, or entering certain codes or creating a character, that's a little bit too much. And we want to make sure that the widest range of patients can participate. And to that end, it's important to have multiple inputs. So a controller that can be held in either hand, doesn't really need to be moved, hopefully can be used by just moving your wrist very gently, or even better, gaze control as an option for patients. So having multiple options available within the same application is really worth including. And similar to starting slow and ramping up, getting into the application and getting it started should be really simple. So patients hopefully should have a simple menu or start screen to acclimate themselves, but nothing too complicated, no character creation. And you want them to kind of be able to dive in. And this is really important when it comes to emergency room use cases, where time is, of course, of the essence. And then in terms of patient comfort, we really think it's worth having nature-based environments with a very clear horizon. So, and you want to maintain that. It is possible in VR to kind of rotate environments, but we found that that mismatch of where your gravity should be pushing you in VR and where it is against your hospital bed is an important one to not break. So it's more important to design an application that accommodates how a patient's laying in the real world and matching that so that there's no mismatch. So it's really worth designing for the patient body position. And then in terms of motion, constant velocity, no acceleration, that's important as well. And then in terms of environments, we think creating surreal environments can be very engaging and interesting in VR, but for easy understanding, we think nature-based environments and nature-based experiences are really important. And then we also recommend having zero text and zero reading, so patients aren't having to decipher complicated menus, and that we can work with a wide range of patients no matter their verbal ability. And then in terms of game actions, it's really important to have simple interactions for patients that they understand. So you want to make sure that you're not having them do something that's really complicated or bizarre. So collecting fruit is a great one. Giving animals a drink of water, coloring fish or objects, simple interactions that make sense to patients is really where you want to start. And then in terms of gameplay and what patients are doing, No failure is really an important motto. So you want to make sure that patients aren't dying, they can't fail. All these traditional game mechanics that use adrenaline and fear of failure, number of lives, those really don't have a place in what we're designing. You're not trying to compete with the likes of Fortnite and Call of Duty. You're creating a simple, easily digestible escape. And then in terms of allowing patients to engage or disengage with the environment, you want to make sure that we're providing active or passive distraction. So patients who are leaning into the environment as much as they want and finding all the fish or collecting all the fruit, that seems great. But also if patients want to disengage and just look around during the procedure, I think both of those should be available to patients. So that's my presentation. Thanks for your time and attention. If anyone out there is interested in seeing our completed trials or has any questions, please reach out to me. I'm always happy to send over some of our published studies and posters, and hope to hear from you soon and looking forward to your questions. Thanks.
Well, thank you, Simon, for presenting your work with us today. Next up, I am really pleased to present Josh Sackman, who is with Applied VR and was at my side actually the very first time that I ever used virtual reality. He and Walter Greenleaf came to my lab and they put me in a window washer rig on the side of a 50-story building and then asked me to jump off. And I'll never forget that moment to this day. So that was the first time that I used virtual reality. And I thought, wow, if we can use it for that, then maybe we can also use it for good, for positive things. And indeed, that's what Josh has been working on for many years since. Now, his company Applied VR has recently obtained regulatory approval for its first major treatment, XR treatment, EaseVRX, for the management of chronic lower back pain. And we'll be hearing more about that both today and also on the main stage with Beth Darnell and in a few other areas throughout the course of this symposium. But right now we're going to hear in the XR Theater from Josh, who is going to discuss exploring the virtual reality regulatory pathway, lessons learned from obtaining FDA approval. This is so key because, you know, in a conference like this, we focus on all the exciting science and the opportunities and the innovation and these amazing software programs, but none of that does any good if we can't figure out how to actually get it into the hands of consumers. And of course, there are different ways to do that. Nanea, for example, with Trip, has put her Trip VR right on Oculus, and it's available to consumers through that pathway. Whereas Josh in Applied VR has focused on another pathway, the regulatory pathway. So right now we're going to hear more about that second pathway. And I think this is an extremely useful and timely discussion, particularly for those of you that are looking at potential regulatory pathways for your own MXR therapeutics. So without further ado, I'll stop talking there and introduce Josh Sackman to the stage of the XR Theater. Josh, thanks so much for being with us today.
Hi, I'm Josh Sackman. I'm the president and co-founder of Applied VR. And today, I'm here to talk to you about our journey through the FDA, creating this new immersive therapeutics regulatory pathway. Now, first and foremost, this isn't just about Applied VR product Reliever as the first de novo granted immersive therapeutic for pain. This is about establishing a new category, a category of medicines based on virtual and augmented reality technology that can address serious medical conditions in ways other technology simply can't. And while we're here to talk about our experience and our process, this is really about helping this new category exist as something that could be easily prescribed by doctors, reimbursed by insurance, and widely accessible like other forms of drugs and devices and other options available to patients. So before we dive into our experience with FDA, I want to take a step back and talk about what the product, data, and process was that we took to get to the point of submission. So to give a brief highlight, Reliever is a skills-based program developed with cross-functional experts led by Dr. Beth Darnell, a leading pain scientist and psychologist out of Stanford, and cross-disciplinary team that built an 8-week program that leverages evidence-based principles in diaphragmatic breathing, in mindful escapes, pain neuroscience education, relaxation interoception, as well as attention control and distraction, to equip patients skills, starting with our initial indication in chronic low back pain, to help them be able to reduce their pain and pain interference based on having new coping strategies based on these behavioral skills. It's developed into an 8-week curriculum with weekly clinical themes that reinforce concepts that ultimately help patients, so when the goggles come off, they're better equipped to manage their chronic pain. And while we're starting chronic low back pain, we see this model expand into a wide range of chronic pain and other adjacencies to give patients tools in the home that can be self-administered that help them live better qualities of life using these unique properties of virtual reality. And while I'm starting by talking about the therapeutic program, it's really important to also understand that it's not just the content, but it's the software and the hardware that's also considered in these regulatory submissions. While there are SAMD, software as a medical device, which focuses on the delivery of the software and content on existing consumer devices, because VR is such a novel space, and because we're also thinking about the use case in the home, where the hardware could interfere with pacemakers or other medical devices that are nearby, we also needed to think about the safety of the hardware itself. And so we took the device through all the same IEC basic safety testing to look at electromagnetic interference and compatibility, electrical safety, and other things to make sure that we feel comfortable with chronic pain patients using this in their home in an unsupervised self-administered setting. And beyond the safety of it, if the device is hard to use, if it's not engaging, this device will sit on a shelf. And so we really focused on developing the software with its interface, analytics and background services, and really thinking through that user experience to make sure it's as simple as taking it out of the box, powering it on, putting on the headset, and getting immersed in the therapeutic treatment program. And so we wanted to maximize control and maximize protection of our patients throughout the process. And so this is what patients get when they receive a kit from us. Now, in terms of the clinical data that we brought to FDA, we completed a randomized controlled trial that was sham control and blinded from both participants and the analysts to look at the use of this 8-week program with 188 patients who are equally divided into our reliever treatment program, as well as a sham control, which accounted for the same ritual, putting on the VR headset once a day for 8 weeks. But instead of seeing immersive content, they viewed innocuous videos of nature, of an eagle building a nest or a fox grazing on the prairie. Over 8 weeks, patients with reliever experienced a 42% reduction in pain intensity and between a 49% and 57% improvement in how pain interferes with things like activity, sleep, mood, and stress. And worth noting, that's not on the slide, but we're in the process of publishing the 6-month data around this. After returning the device, patients still retained a 30% or greater improvement in all those primary outcomes, where the sham regressed towards the mean. So we could really see that how teaching skills that they could learn more effectively and retain longer can be applied to their life that lead to these durable outcomes. Because we don't want to keep people contained in VR throughout their life and manage their symptoms. It's about empowering patients with tools to better manage their conditions, which is evident in some of our 6-month data that we'll be publishing shortly. Now, going the regulated device route isn't the only path you can take with your product. There certainly are viable wellness approaches, but they do come with a trade-off. So I wanted to talk a little bit about what are the benefits of spending the extra time, money, resources, and heartache to go through this regulated pathway. Well, first and foremost, if you want to make disease-specific treatment, in our case, we're addressing chronic pain, which includes the chronic low back pain indication we're starting with first, and going after other types of conditions where we have clear protocols and messaging around how our product benefits those conditions. That's a requirement to go through FDA. If you want to evaluate the true safety and efficacy of your product, that goes beyond what typical, even the best standard research and peer-reviewed publications still don't touch the level of scrutiny that FDA has around the safety and efficacy of your program. If you want the imbued credibility of having FDA clearance or authorization, if you want to have a label that specifies the indications, intended use, and how your product's to be used in a way that's easy to understand and implement for patients, providers, and payers. And lastly, if you have great data and you want to make claims, because that's the power of data, to say, we can actually reduce pain 42% over 8 weeks without FDA review and authorization or clearance. You can't make those claims. And so while wellness allows you a faster pathway and certainly less organizational burden, especially if you're invested in evidence-based programs and have strong data, you want to be able to leverage that because that ultimately drives adoption, awareness, and credibility behind these programs. That said, you need to carefully consider the cost and trade-offs between these worlds. And speaking of that, FDA is a commitment. On average, it takes 3 to 7 years, costs $31 million. And I can't overemphasize that this has an impact across your organization. It's not just around your product. It's not just about your clinical programs. You have quality management programs that are implemented across manufacturing and operations, IT and cybersecurity, marketing, commercialization, and there's certainly lots of process, lots of documentation, and lots of overhead, including additional hires that need to be made to maintain your QMS and regulated products. And so this needs to be taken under careful consideration, but ultimately this trade-off's worth it, especially in establishing this new category, to be able to say that immersive therapeutics are safe and effective, and they could be used to diagnose, cure, mitigate, prevent, or treat a condition or disease, depending on what your product is, rather than having to make a soft claim like maintaining or encouraging a healthy lifestyle. And so please consider whether you have the organizational resources, access to consultants, the financial capital, time, and kind of strategic know-how to navigate this, because those are all important before you bite off more than you can chew. At the same time, if you take a step back and strategize, there's lots of benefits you get through taking this pathway. So what does a submission look like? Well, the submission is straightforward. As you unpack these questions, there's lots of nuance and detail. And so while it's simple, it's not easy. First and foremost, you have to articulate your assessment of benefit. What are the clinical benefits? Are they clinically meaningful? What level of uncertainty do you have that these benefits exist across a wide population? Are they generalizable? What are the risks? Even something low risk like VR carries risk. In our trial, patients experienced headaches, facial discomfort with the headsets. And while they aren't serious adverse events, they still are things that need to be considered and mitigated as we think about developing our product and program and support and other things around it. And ultimately, the FDA decision comes to a comparison between the benefits and the risks. And can you articulate that in a way that your risks have been mitigated and that your benefits have been maximized, and you have a clear understanding of what's going on with your product and within your data? Well, I'm going to go deeper into the submission process. Let's take a step back at how you get there. Well, the submission itself may take a few months to a year. It takes a lot of effort and work to get to the place where you're ready to submit. We followed a similar framework that Dr. Brennan Spiegel, Dr. Burkhead, and many others have published that mimic the drug and device development model, where you have VR1, 2, and 3 phased studies that ultimately build the evidence and strengthen the product and offering to the place where you're ready to study it in a pivotal trial. In our case, we spent our first few years of our business implementing a wellness product in the hospital. And while ultimately that's not the end product or intended use that we took, we built a lot of competencies in understanding user experience, understanding how to develop effective therapeutic content, understanding how to structure clinical trials and understand our endpoints, figuring out how to operationalize VR and provide something that's not just beneficial for patients, but not disruptive to the clinicians administering it. And so our first few years, we're developing clinical trials in this acute pain space, developing competencies. From there, around 2018, as hardware improved to a place where we moved away from the Samsung Gear, where you had this clunky phone plugging into a headset and tethered headsets to computers, we finally had standalones where we felt confidence that we could bring this device outside the hospital or clinic and into the patient's home. In those early VR1 and VR2 studies, we learned a lot, especially around what not to do in administering VR, how to improve the onboarding experience, how to protocolize the content better, how to improve the content in a way that doesn't require explanation from a clinician before they use it, to create an operating system and interface that's intuitive and easy for someone to follow for an extended period of time. So we started with in-office testing, moved to a 1-week in-home trial, moved to a 3-week randomized controlled trial, which that data was ultimately leveraged to apply for and receive our breakthrough device designation, to ultimately our 8-week study. And this was highly iterative in both the product development as well as the clinical development sense. And I want to share that there was a lot of work and iteration to get to the point where we're at now, to be able to say that our device is easier to use than an ATM or iPhone based on our data from the system usability scale that we used in our study. That certainly wasn't the case back in 2018. And so it takes time and commitment to get to a place, as well as a lot of patience, as well as confidence and fortitude that you're going down the right path, and that ultimately your device and your data will be used to support the broader commercial vision of your product. So as I said, the actual review process is fairly straightforward. It consists of a few different stages, depending on your company, your resources, your experience. It can take a varying amount of time to actually prepare the package. And there is quite a bit of documentation. In our case, we applied for a de novo because we did not find a predicate in the market. Now companies can leverage Reliever and Applied VR's product as a predicate to cite we have a self-administered at-home virtual reality behavioral therapy. And companies can, if they're going after similar indications or similar use cases, can leverage that for their own submissions. But within 15 days, we found that we're eligible for de novo. And there's essentially 2 75-day halves. And this can vary. They're not required to stick to these timetables. But in our case, this is roughly what we saw, that within the first 75 days, a reviewer will spend time with your submission package, and they'll surface additional information requests. Those are questions or deficiencies, which could range from this clinical trial data needs to be explained, or there may be circumstances where you're required to collect more clinical data, to questions around the product, the software, the development process, the quality management system, all aspects of your product and program and organization to assess the benefit, the risk, and the trade-off between those two. The clock stops at that point for the company to receive those questions and spend up to 6 months answering those questions. If you go beyond 6 months, you have to restart the submission. And so in a case where you're asked to run a new clinical trial, that could be a major setback that forces you to start the submission process again. In our case, we turned around those comments within a few months. And from that point, within 75 days, FDA will come to make a decision. There is interaction within that period, so it's not silence. We had a healthy amount of interaction between Applied VR and our reviewer, ultimately where November 2021, we're granted our decision. So if you haven't gathered by now, taking your product through the FDA regulatory process is a lift. And while it's straightforward, it's far from simple, and there's lots of uncertainty. And this was an entire lift across the entire organization. So it requires clear alignment and commitment from the top. But as we start to think about what it takes to establish this new category of immersive therapeutics, which we talked about, doctor prescribed, and FDA certainly plays a role in the credibility and willingness to prescribe, and payer reimbursed. And while FDA isn't required, in fact, in a recent survey, payer respondents, 21% said, no, it's not important to have FDA approval. But 74% of respondents said it was. It's imperative to have this because it really separates the credibility and establishes the safety and efficacy as payers think about promoting solutions and paying for solutions to their beneficiaries who are in need. And so while this is a big lift, it can offer tremendous benefits as you think about starting to commercialize. And certain payers have hard requirements that they won't even pilot products that are not FDA cleared, approved, authorized, whatever the term is that represents your product. And so as we think about becoming leaders in the space, we want to pave down a way that establishes a pathway that makes it easier to take this path, because ultimately we think this is so essential in order for our category to succeed. Often in healthcare, interests, incentives are so misaligned. You hear about these key Ps of healthcare: patients, providers, payers, policymakers, and they all have different needs that don't have to, but often compete with each other. Patients need something that's easy to use, effective, and engaging. Having the stamp from FDA that your product was reviewed for safety and efficacy helps improve the confidence of patients and allows you to make claims that speak directly to the needs of patients. Similarly, on the provider side, they want to understand that this is effective and safe for their patients and how it's used. again, the intended use and indications and the ability to talk about the conditions you're targeting and the benefits help providers understand where this fits into their practice and allows them to know that you've given the thought around where this fits under the treatment guidelines. And that's ultimately what we want to get, where this gets embedded under the Pain Society's treatment guidelines. And we've shown that we can fit this into their workflow and not just add clinical value, but also make their life easier because we're providing new solutions for patients who truly in need with unmet needs. Payers, in addition to often needing this FDA, stamp of approval or a stamp of review, also need to assess the cost. And so what I want to say is, while getting authorized or cleared or approved by FDA is a huge step forward, that's where the work actually begins on the payer side. As you start to build the health economic value story through HEOR studies and other, value dossier efforts to create a clear story of where this fits into the patient journey, what costs and resources does this offset, and what benefit does this have, not just from a clinical perspective, but from a business and economic perspective. And lastly, as you think about policymakers and key constituencies like CMS, it's really hard to think about Medicaid and Medicare without FDA. And while they're not completely intertwined, it's heavily weighed, and certain benefit categorization doesn't exist without it. For example, in our case, having hardware and having VR have hardware is a really unique benefit beyond software-only digital therapeutics, and that there are pathways for durable medical equipment. And so having something that is FDA cleared and has a hardware component that's been reviewed and shown to be durable opens up new reimbursement pathways that software alone can't offer. And so as we think about what are the aligning factors behind these key groups of people who are needed to establish this category, we think having a regulated product helps pull these interests and establishes the credibility for these products. And again, this just isn't for Reliever and Applied VR. We need multiple companies, we need multiple products in multiple therapeutic areas to establish utility in this space. Ultimately, what we want to do is be generous with our experience sharing and ask others to do the same to elevate this industry. Immersive therapeutics have truly unique benefits that offer a value to unmet needs for patients who are suffering with a number of conditions in a number of areas. And we want to see these get to market. We want to get past the illusion that this is a gaming and entertainment technology, and this has real utility across a number of applications. And while I can sit here and spend a lot of time talking about our experience and the benefits that we're seeing, there's nothing better than hearing the firsthand accounts of patients like Medora and Bob, whose lives have changed because of this. And ultimately, our goal is to create access. There's so much inequity in terms of access to quality care. Patients like Bob and Medora and many others needlessly suffer when there's great applications of immersive therapeutics that can make some improvement in their life. And our goal today is to catalyze the conversation and help people start thinking more critically about how to collectively come together and build this new category of immersive therapeutics so Medora and Bob have better futures. Thanks so much for allowing me to share our experience today.
Well, thanks so much, Josh, for sharing with us everything that you've been going through and teaching us what's involved in getting MXR therapeutics through the FDA successfully and allowing us to better understand that regulatory pathway. We'll be hearing more tomorrow in a deep dive session where we'll then talk about, after the regulatory pathway has been achieved, how do we actually get these MXR therapeutics to market and how do we get them reimbursed? So we look forward to hearing that deep dive discussion tomorrow afternoon. Check the agenda for more on that. Okay, well, next up in the XR Theater, I'm pleased to introduce Riza Weisberg, who is the Chief Clinical Officer at Behaviour. She is a licensed clinical psychologist and an expert in cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT, and she is also a professor of psychiatry at the Boston University School of Medicine and an adjunct professor of family medicine at Brown University. And she will be discussing a talk titled VR Solutions for Employee Burnout, from Stress Reduction to Finding Value in Your Work. Very important topic, particularly for those of us in healthcare who have been through all of us really, have been through a tremendously stressful 2-year period We're all looking for ways to help reduce burnout. Also, if you want to learn more about Behavior, they have a booth in our exhibit hall. So at the end of this session, feel free to head on over to the exhibit hall and check them out, along with all the other vendors and companies that are presenting various hardware and software solutions here at VMed 22. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Dr. Weisberg to the stage. Thank you so much for being with us here at VMed 22.
Hi, I'm Risa Weisberg, and I'm the Chief Clinical Officer at Behavior Inc. And I'm going to be speaking about virtual reality solutions for employee burnout, from stress reduction all the way to finding value in your work. News of healthcare worker burnout surrounds us. And though the issue isn't brand new, certainly the COVID-19 pandemic has brought this into a full crisis. And that's because this mental and physical exhaustion really matters. Not only is it associated with poor employee well-being, but burnout is also associated with increased absenteeism and presenteeism. So showing up to work, but not really being fully present when you're there, giving 100% of your best effort. So burnout impacts employees, but also the institutions for which they work. And importantly, burnout's associated with increased clinical error that affects patient care. So also has impacts on the patients that we serve. Now, any conversation about burnout, I think, really needs to address the fact that contributors to burnout are not just those that lay within the individual. And so solutions to burnout can't all just lay within the individual employee either. There are a great number of structural contributors to burnout. And in fact, numerous studies have found that burnout is most prevalent in healthcare workers who were working continuously for over 8 hours a day without a break, and who were so busy at work that they were really unable to get their regular needs met. So they didn't have a chance to eat regular meals or drink enough water or to sleep more than 6 hours a day. Burnout's also less prevalent in healthcare workers who were satisfied by their hospital's infection control procedures and who felt that their hospital provided them the opportunity to get sufficient psychological support. The intervention that we're going to focus on today is one that lies within the individual employee, but perhaps is one that can be part of a suite of changes that an institution takes to attempt to tackle burnout, and certainly can fit with that last bullet point of being a means to show employees that you care and are attempting to provide them with sufficient psychological support. A lot of the attention around burnout has focused really on stress reduction, which makes sense because a lot of what burnout is occupational stress. And there's been a number of programs designed to attempt to reduce stress and research done on the efficacy of those programs. And data shows that a specific type of mindfulness called mindfulness-based stress reduction is really the most impactful for reducing occupational stress and burnout. And so that's where at Behavior we began our journey into employee burnout. And we developed Centered VR. Together with our partners at Johns Hopkins, we developed Centered as an immersive mindfulness-based stress reduction program to help reduce chronic stress, build resilience, enhance coping skills, all through mindfulness practice. And we piloted this with a group of frontline healthcare workers, nurses working in COVID units. And it appears to be doing quite well. 66% of those nurses reported that they felt revitalized to resume work after they took a break with their VR session. 75% experienced stress reduction in just 4 to 6 weeks of using the program. And that reduction in stress was statistically significant. And a full 87% of the nurses stated that they would like to see Centered VR become a standard employee benefit. So we feel centered is quite promising as a solution, but evidence suggests we might be missing something by only focusing on stress reduction and mindfulness. And that's because burnout isn't just about stress. This survey of over 2,000 frontline healthcare workers in New York City found that, yes, during the pandemic, a great number of them reported symptoms of burnout, up to 40%. But importantly, approximately 25% also reported symptoms of major depressive disorder and or generalized anxiety disorder, and almost that many reported symptoms of post-traumatic stress. And that study isn't alone. So in a systematic review conducted recently of the impact of different studies looking at the impact of COVID-19 on healthcare workers, percentages of these kinds of symptoms really ranged across studies, but up to 78% of the studies found that up to 78% of healthcare workers were reporting symptoms of stress. But importantly, up to 72% were also reporting symptoms of anxiety, and up to 65% were reporting symptoms of depression. And depression and anxiety seem to be the way in which burnout impacts quality of life. So this study of frontline healthcare workers in Korea found that, yes, virus-related stress and burnout had an impact on the health and well-being of frontline healthcare workers. But it appeared that that impact was mediated fully by symptoms of depression and anxiety in those workers. In other words, the way in which burnout impacted quality of life was that burnout led to symptoms of depression and anxiety, and symptoms of depression and anxiety then in turn led to poor physical and emotional health, poor relationships, and environmental consequences for those workers. So taking this together, we felt that in addition to stress reduction, we really needed to be developing an intervention that targets symptoms of anxiety and depression as well. And we're not alone in that thinking. There have been a number of other studies and groups that have looked to implement treatments for anxiety and depression in frontline healthcare workers. This study utilized acceptance and commitment therapy, which is a third wave type of CBT, and provided that to a group of nurses. Another group received no intervention at all, and found that ACT was associated with a reduced perceived stress compared to those nurses who received no intervention. And specifically, some of the cognitive techniques that are utilized in ACT and in cognitive behavioral therapy have been found to be effective in reducing the connection between occupational stress and the mental health and sleep problems that can be created. So those techniques are cognitive reframing and cognitive diffusion. Cognitive reframing is a technique in which an individual is encouraged to identify the anxious or depressive thoughts that they're having, and then examine those thoughts in a number of ways. The first way is to examine whether or not that thought is valid or true. What's the evidence that you have from the rest of your life that that thought is true or not? So a worker having the thought, there's no way I can cope with this. I can't possibly get through this another day. I'm not strong enough for this. Those types of thoughts would be asked to be encouraged to look at the evidence for that. How have you gotten through other times in the past? Have you been able to cope with things that you thought you couldn't cope with in the past? How'd you cope yesterday? And was yesterday any easier than today? They also might be encouraged to look at the usefulness of the thought. So how does the thought, I'm not strong enough to manage this, help you to meet your goals and to engage in behavior that you care about? Or does that thought hurt you and get in the way? Cognitive diffusion is a technique from ACT, which is similar in some ways, and encourages the user to examine their thoughts really just as thoughts. So yes, I'm having the thought that I'm not strong enough to cope with this. I know this myself, having the thought that I'm not strong enough to cope with this. But that's just a thought I'm having. It doesn't necessarily mean that it's true. And it doesn't necessarily have to impact me or have any meaning about who I am. It doesn't mean I'm not a strong person. It just means I'm having that thought. I have lots of thoughts. They don't necessarily all mean something about me. Aren't necessarily all true. So it helps us to diffuse the relationship between our thoughts and ourselves. So we wanted to create an intervention that would help tackle stress, help tackle those depressive and anxious thoughts. And we also realized, importantly, that burnout and values are profoundly interrelated. So it's been said that engagement is mutually exclusive with burnout, that clinicians who are engaged feel nourished by their work, they have personal agency, and they feel that they have the means to affect their outcomes. There's a sense that their work is making a difference. It was very easy to see how at the beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic, healthcare workers felt clearly that they were doing work that was valuable. The whole world came together to tell them how valued their work was. We hung signs in our windows and on our front lawns. We got together at certain times of night and hung out the windows, banging pots and pans together. We all made cards to show that workers were our heroes. But over time, it's been harder for some of our frontline healthcare workers to hold on to that sense that the work that they're doing affects outcomes, that the work that they're doing is valuable, when they're just not seeing as much change as they might like. When over time, despite all their hard work, waiting rooms are still full, emergency rooms are still full, ICUs are still full. They're still intubating patients every day. And they're still telling family members that patients have died. And having this meaning in your work and your value of your work really does matter. This study depicted in the graph looked at physicians and asked them in the blue bars, these were individuals who said they were spending less than 20% of their day doing work that they found meaningful. The green bar is those who spent more than 20% of their days doing work that they found meaningful and important. And you'll see that the rates of burnout were far lower in those individuals who spent more of their day doing work that they found meaningful. And a number of other studies have shown that with physicians and nurses, that the amount of time spent engaging in work that they found meaningful was the strongest predictor of career happiness, and also the strongest preventative predictor of burnout. And as a matter of fact, the amount of time spent doing work you find meaningful was more predictive of burnout than was the total number of hours worked. So thinking back to that first slide about structural causes of burnout, yes, working very long hours does predict burnout, but it predicts it less so than the amount of time you're working doing work that you find valuable and meaningful. So we took all of this together to develop a transdiagnostic wellness product as a solution to help people reduce stress, address anxious and depressive thoughts, and reconnect to their values to set value-driven goals. Our solution is translating empirically validated mechanisms of action into fully engaging virtual reality intervention experiences. We know stress, anxiety, and depression are made up of what you think, what you feel, and what you do. So feelings being that physiological arousal, that sympathetic nervous system activation, and that consistently data shows that mindfulness practice helps us to monitor and reduce that activation and to reduce physiological sensations of stress and anxiety. So we're building mindfulness into our transdiagnostic product. We know that anxiety, depression, and stress are made up of what you think as well. Those anxious and depressive thoughts we discussed earlier, and that cognitive reframing and cognitive diffusion techniques are shown repeatedly through empirical evidence to reduce those types of thinking. And so we're building that into our product as well. And that the type of behavior you engage in, whether you're engaging in avoidance behavior, staying home from work, staying in bed, or engaging in value-driven action, matters and helps to impact your symptoms of depression and anxiety. And that values and connecting with your values is important for reducing stress and burnout. So we're building that into our product as well. I'd like to take a second to show you a little bit, a preview of what our product is starting to look like. And we're developing this together with our partners at DSP Pharmaceuticals. So here you speak your thoughts and get to see them, touch them, hold them in your hands. Bringing them with you into our orchard, where you'll physically gather evidence for and against the validity of that thought. And see how that weighs out to rejudge, is that thought true or not? And as you start to reframe those thoughts, your wisdom tree will grow and flourish. You'll come back to your journey map where you get to select other types of care for yourself, including mindfulness experiences. We have a range of different mindfulness situations and settings to explore. This one is our snowy scene. Our portals bring you back to our beautiful lake house, our TV that provides psychoeducation, and to other mindfulness settings. Here our lakeside view. We're also building a way to reconnect with values through VR. And so in development now is a value sorting technique where common values, wellness, helping others, community, family, love, knowledge, will appear in front of you, and you can sort these and prioritize which ones are most important to you and the way that you want to live your life. You'll then be instructed on how to set long-term goals that are in service of those values. And through our companion app, set short-term weekly goals on your way to those long-term goals, all in line with your values. Our companion app will also guide you through daily journaling, which will sync with our CBT practice in VR. You'll see your progress and achievement, both your progress through our VR program, but also your progress on those goals that you've set in real life. There'll be frequent reminders to get back into the headset and practice there, and to also do your real life practices. And periodic assessments of your mood, your anxiety, your stress levels, and quizzes on the knowledge that you've learned. All of this will be guided with our lovely assistant, Ari. Our digital assistant will be with you in VR. She guides you through the VR experience, helps you to navigate your way throughout the lake house and the accompanying area, and also appears in your companion app and sends you SMS text messages to remind you to engage with the product and to see how you're doing every day. That's what we have so far. We're super excited that this will be launching in the fall of 2022. We invite you to scan here to learn more about the program. And also feel free to reach out to me at risaweisberg@behavior.com. Thank you so much for your time today. We really appreciate it. Bye now.
Well, thank you so much for that talk. And I want to thank all of the presenters during this very interesting XR theater session. I learned an awful lot listening to everybody, and also the chat has been, I think, very helpful function as well. Feel free to continue using that chat so that we can engage maximally around the content of this dynamic and exciting conference, VMed 22. It's now time to take a break. We've got some time to check out the virtual exhibit halls. Please do take a look. As I said before, there's a whole number of outstanding hardware and software programs across the entire MXR spectrum. We have over 20 exhibitors in the hall with a whole wide range of things to take a look at. If you can't get to all of it in one session over the course of the 2 days, there's plenty of time to check out all the booths. the meantime, hope you're enjoying the conference and see you soon.
you.